Chapter 1, What game are you playing now? I blinked, opened my eyes, then closed them again, repeating the action. It took staring at the opulent villa before me, the kind only found in novels, for the reality to sink in. I had transmigrated into a book. Seriously? Eleanor, you've actually sent people to harm Isabelle again? You've held on to the title of Mrs. Julian too long. A furious male voice erupted from behind me. I turned to see a strikingly handsome man, his features sharp and aristocratic, slamming a document onto the polished surface in front of me. The words divorce agreement leaped out, stark and accusatory. Eleanor, Isabelle, Mrs. Julian? Weren't these the names from that wildly popular, melodramatic short novel I'd been reading? Could it be? Had I really been thrust into the role of the tragic heroine, the one who'd endured 3 pregnancies only to be left with terminal bone cancer and a broken heart? Eleanor, let's get divorced. Julian repeated, his voice clipped and devoid of warmth, like ice scraping against ice. For a fleeting second, I was stunned. Then, a surge of defiance coursed through me. Divorce it is then, I retorted, a sneer curling my lip. Who even cares about this charade anymore? This time, it was Julian who faltered. His narrow, hawk-like eyes narrowed further, scrutinizing me with suspicion. What game are you playing now, Eleanor? I suppressed a roll of my eyes, meeting his gaze head-on, unflinching. I agreed to a divorce. Understand? This infuriating, scumbag man, but translated more naturally as jerk. While reading the novel, I'd yearned to personally throttle him on behalf of the heroine. He was clearly taken aback by my swift agreement, falling into an uncharacteristic silence. I casually flipped through the agreement on the table. The audacity of this jerk. He expected the heroine to walk away with absolutely nothing? Dream on. However, Julian, I declared, tearing the offensively one-sided document into pieces before his very eyes, since this is your fault, your marital infidelity, I'll be taking half of your assets. Perfectly reasonable, wouldn't you say? Agree to that, and we can draft a new agreement right now, and be done with each other for good. Eleanor, you've finally shown your true colors. Julian spat, his handsome face contorted with disgust. You schemed and manipulated your way into marrying me, all for money. You're nothing but a gold-digging opportunist. And you're just realizing this now? I shot back, my voice dripping with sarcasm. If I'm not a gold digger, how could I possibly live up to your low expectations? Spare me the theatrics, Julian. You hand over the money, and I'm gone. This Mrs. Julian title? Anyone who wants it can have it. Frankly, I'm over it. With a flourish, I sank into the plush sofa, adopting a deliberately nonchalant, almost gangster-like pose. Julian stared at me, disbelief warring with fury on his face. Then, he gritted his teeth. You're dreaming if you think you're getting a penny more than you deserve. Money that doesn't belong to you? Not a chance. I couldn't resist rolling my eyes at him. This infuriating Eleanor, the original one, had endured 3 abortions for him, and now, on her deathbed, this heartless swine wouldn't even offer a decent settlement. What on earth was wrong with the original Eleanor's eyesight to fall for him in the first place? Handsome face and shrewd business acumen aside, he was, at his core, a complete and utter jerk. Fine, then we'll remain in this delightful stalemate, I said, my voice dangerously sweet. As long as I'm still Mrs. Julian, your precious Isabelle will remain nothing more than a shameless homewrecker. Don't you dare call Isabelle names. Julian roared, his face flushing crimson. His fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He looked on the verge of exploding, of resorting to violence. This, threatening me with violence now? How utterly predictable. The thought sent a shiver of fear down my spine, a lingering echo of the original Eleanor's deep-seated dread of him. Don't worry, Eleanor, I vowed silently, now that I'm here, I'll make him pay for everything he's put you through. What's wrong, Mr. High and Mighty Julian? Thinking of resorting to physical violence now? Go ahead, be my guest. I'll make sure the whole world knows how you treat your wife. Those hospital records from the 3 abortions you forced me to have? Oh, I kept those. Just waiting for the right moment to share. What's the matter, Julian? Angry? Want to hit me? Or perhaps choke me like you used to? This entire living room is under surveillance, remember? Crystal clear. Recordings. Perfect evidence for a domestic violence lawsuit, wouldn't you say? Imagine the headlines, Julian. Food Corporation CEO embroiled in scandal. Watching Julian's face twist with impotent rage, seeing him seethe and fume while utterly helpless against me, I almost burst out laughing. This was just the beginning. Chapter 2, Bone Cancer. The door slammed shut with a resounding bang, Julian storming out in a cloud of fury. I scoffed. Compared to the torment he had inflicted on the original Eleanor, this was nothing. Absolutely nothing. Before I could fully savor my small victory, a metallic tang filled my nostrils. A wave of nausea washed over me, and I instinctively raised a hand to my nose. Dabbing with a tissue, I saw it, bright, crimson blood. Oh, right. I'd almost forgotten. The original Eleanor had just been diagnosed with bone cancer. She had barely 10 months to live. In a final act of desperate, misguided love, she'd even considered sleeping with Julian one last time, hoping to conceive a child, a living testament to their shattered marriage before she quietly slipped away. How foolish, Eleanor. Utterly foolish. For a man like him? Not worth it. The stark contrast between my assertive, confrontational demeanor and the original Eleanor's timid, subservient nature must have been obvious. Yet, Julian hadn't noticed a thing. It only highlighted how little he truly knew, or cared to know, about the woman he'd married. She was invisible to him. He didn't deserve her. He didn't deserve anyone's love, least of all Eleanor's. I went upstairs to the master suite, rummaging through Eleanor's walk-in closet. I selected a sophisticated Chanel haute couture dress. Something elegant and powerful. After a meticulous grooming session, I retrieved my medical file and prepared to return to the hospital. The old Eleanor, consumed by her misplaced affection for Julian, had neglected her appearance, dedicating herself solely to being the perfect wife. She'd even ignored her own health, refusing treatment for the bone cancer, her entire world revolving around that man. But I was not the original Eleanor. I intended to live. To thrive. My immediate priority was survival. I needed to undergo surgery, fight this disease, and secure my own future. Then, and only then, would I deal with Julian and Isabelle. Those despicable and scumbag man and White Lotus, a term for seemingly innocent but manipulative woman, but we can translate it as jerk and two-faced woman. I opened the grand front doors of the villa, ready to step outside, when a figure lunged at me. Eleanor, it's all my fault, I'm so sorry. Please, don't blame Julian, he's not at fault. I'm pregnant with his child. Please, I beg you, divorce him. If you agree, I'll do anything, anything at all, even die. Isabelle, clad in an immaculate white dress, the very picture of fragile innocence, wept dramatically, clutching at my legs, kneeling at my feet as if I were the one who had wronged her. When, in reality, she was the one who'd stolen my husband. Oh really? Anything at all? I echoed, arms crossed, watching her performance with cold amusement. All right then, first, get rid of the baby. Then, slap yourself across the face a few dozen times. Then, maybe, just maybe, I'll consider forgiving you. Isabelle's tear-filled eyes widened, staring up at me, seemingly shocked that her pathetic attempt at emotional blackmail had backfired so spectacularly. Eleanor, the baby is innocent, she wailed, her voice rising in pitch. You can ask me to do anything else, but this child is Julian's. I can't possibly. Her sobs intensified, as if I were the monstrous villain in this scenario. The original Eleanor, for Julian's sake, had indeed endured 3 abortions. The first 2 times, Julian had dragged her to the clinic, coldly demanding she terminate the pregnancies. The 3rd time, she'd secretly undergone the procedure, desperate to please him and salvage their failing marriage. The memory ignited a burning anger within me. Summoning a strength I didn't know I possessed, I wrenched my legs free from Isabelle's grasp, my voice hardening. You said you'd do anything, even die, right? Well then, die already. On the day of your funeral, I'll personally deliver the divorce papers to your graveside. Consider it my wedding gift to you and Julian. Eleanor. How can you be so cruel? Isabelle shrieked, her carefully constructed facade of innocence crumbling. I'm carrying a child. And you actually want me to die? You're a murderer. The two-faced woman's true colors were finally showing. Me? Cruel? A murderer? I was speechless. The sheer audacity of this woman to twist the narrative so completely was breathtaking. If you don't have the guts to die, then spare me the pathetic theatrics, I snapped, disgust lacing my voice. You sicken me. Just get lost. I stepped around her, my heels clicking sharply on the stone steps, heading towards the waiting car. To my utter astonishment, Isabelle suddenly toppled backward, tumbling down the steps with a theatrical shriek. Eleanor. Why did you push me? She screamed, her voice laced with feigned agony. How could you be so heartless? My stomach, it hurts so much. Chapter 3, Framing Me. Predictably, right on cue, the male protagonist arrived, ready to defend the damsel in distress and condemn the villainous female lead. Sure enough, Julian appeared, his face a mask of alarm as he rushed towards us. I narrowed my eyes. So, the two-faced woman was trying to frame me? I hadn't even touched her. Fine. If that's the game she wanted to play, I'd play along. I descended the steps, my high heels clicking ominously on the stone. With deliberate precision, I raised my stiletto heel and brought it down hard on her outstretched hand, the sharp point grinding and twisting against her palm. Isabelle held, a truly authentic scream of pain this time, tears streaming down her face. This agony was far more convincing than her previous melodramatic performance. That's right, I hissed, my voice low and menacing. You know I'm not someone to be trifled with now, don't you? And yet, you still came crawling to my doorstep, begging for a beating. Some people just have a masochistic streak, I suppose. Not content with just that, I raised my hand and delivered 2 sharp slaps across Isabelle's face. Consider it payback for the original Eleanor, I thought with grim satisfaction. Eleanor. What are you doing? How dare you hit Isabelle? Julian reached Isabelle's side in a flash, scooping up the weeping woman into his arms. Eleanor and Isabelle. The stark difference in the way he addressed us was telling, wasn't it? Hit her? Yes, I hit her, I said, shrugging with feigned indifference. Should I have scheduled an appointment first? Besides, she practically begged for it. Didn't you, Isabelle? Tell him. Julian, it's all my fault, Isabelle sobbed, burying her face in Julian's chest. Don't blame Eleanor. I'm the one who's sorry. It's all my fault. If I hadn't read the original novel, I might have actually been impressed by her Oscar-worthy performance. See? She says it's not my fault, I said, with a dismissive wave of my hand. Eleanor, you are a viper. Julian snarled, his eyes blazing with fury. You're just taking advantage of Isabelle's kindness and innocence. He glared at me, his expression a mixture of disgust and righteous indignation. Then, cradling Isabelle protectively, he turned to leave. Isabelle, I'm taking you to the hospital right now. I won't let Eleanor get away with this. I pulled a sanitizing wipe from my purse, scrubbing my hand vigorously, where I'd touched Isabelle. Hitting that woman had made my hand feel dirty. Hailing a taxi to the hospital, I checked in and collected my medical file, heading towards the oncology department. Walking down the hospital corridor, fate, or perhaps just cruel irony, intervened. I ran directly into Julian and Isabelle. Isabelle's hand was bandaged, her head nestled against Julian's shoulder, as they strolled along, chatting and laughing intimately. The dog-like man and woman, a very harsh term for adulterous couple. I couldn't resist muttering the insult under my breath, a bitter taste in my mouth for the original Eleanor's wasted devotion. Eleanor? What are you doing here at the hospital? Isabelle asked, her voice dripping with false concern. Her arm tightened possessively around Julian's waist. Are you feeling unwell? None of your business, I snapped, my voice sharp. Mind your own affairs, Isabelle. Interfering in other people's lives tends to shorten one's lifespan, you know? Isabelle's face crumpled, and she burrowed deeper into Julian's embrace, feigning hurt. Eleanor, don't be so unreasonable. Julian barked, his irritation palpable. Isabelle was just expressing concern for you. His tone infuriated me. I don't need her concern. Frankly, I'd prefer to live a few more years, thank you very much. I retorted, my voice dripping with sarcasm. An unexpected pang of emotion, a sharp ache of sadness, pierced through me. It was the original Eleanor's lingering pain, her unacknowledged grief. I stepped closer, fixing my gaze on the detestable couple before me. Julian, I said, my voice gaining strength. Just because I retorted to Isabelle doesn't make her the victim here. Remember all the cruel, hurtful things you've said to me? Do you think that didn't hurt? Isabelle is a fragile woman, is she? And I'm not? Am I made of steel? I've endured 3 abortions for you, Julian, damaging my body, potentially robbing me of the chance to ever be a mother. Do you think that didn't cause me pain? Do you think I'm not entitled to feel wronged? We've been married for 3 years, and now you're divorcing me for her, demanding I leave with nothing? Do you think I don't have the right to feel bitter? To feel betrayed? And you flaunt your affair with Isabelle right in my face, day after day. Do you think that doesn't sting? Do you think I don't feel humiliation and resentment? I poured out my heart, channeling the years of suppressed pain and anguish of the original Eleanor. Julian's brow furrowed. A flicker of something, confusion? Guilt? Crossed his eyes. For once, he was speechless. Chapter 4, Divorce Agreement. Ignoring his stunned silence, I brushed past them, continuing down the corridor. As I walked past Julian, I paused, turning back to face him. If you have any shred of decency left, get that revised divorce agreement to me as soon as possible, I said, my voice firm. Otherwise, don't blame me when I decide to air your dirty laundry in public. Things will get very, very messy for both of you. Eleanor, Julian said, his voice low, almost hesitant. This divorce, are you serious about this? He was still struggling to comprehend the shift in my demeanor, the sudden reversal of roles. He, who had always pushed for divorce, was now questioning my eagerness for it. What else would it be? I retorted, my tone laced with disdain. With a final, withering look, I turned and walked away. Unbeknownst to me, a single sheet of paper slipped from my grasp, fluttering unnoticed to the polished hospital floor. A medical report. Bone cancer, mid-stage. The official diagnosis. Eleanor, you're sick? Julian's voice, laced with a strange urgency, reached me. I turned back, surprised to see a flicker of something akin to concern in his eyes, even a hint of vulnerability. None of your concern, I said, my voice cold and dismissive. You never cared about me before. Don't start pretending now. It's too late. I bent down, snatched up the fallen medical report, and walked away without another word. Faintly, I heard Isabelle's saccharine voice behind me. Julian, Eleanor's friend, that Dr. Gu, is a doctor, isn't he? It wouldn't be difficult for them to fabricate a medical report to gain sympathy, would it? Knock, knock, knock. I rapped on the door of the doctor's office. Eleanor, you're here. The young doctor seated behind the desk looked up, a warm, sunny smile lighting up his handsome face. This was Dr. Ethan Grant, the second male lead of this melodramatic saga, Eleanor's college classmate, and her devoted admirer. He'd confessed his feelings to her multiple times, only to be gently rebuffed each time. Looking at him now, I realized he was just as attractive as Julian, perhaps even more so. And, most importantly, he genuinely cared for Eleanor. "Yes, I'm here," I replied, returning his smile. "I want to proceed with the surgery. You will help me, won't you?" "Are you sure about this, Eleanor?" Ethan asked, his brow furrowing with concern. "Have you discussed this with Julian? The surgery only has a 25% success rate." His genuine concern was palpable. "I'm divorcing him," I stated firmly. "My health, my life, my decisions are mine alone now. Even with only a 25% chance, I trust you, Ethan. I'm placing my life in your hands." In the original novel, compared to the cruel indifference of the male lead, the second male lead was a beacon of light in the heroine's bleak world. "Divorcing? You've really made up your mind?" Ethan studied me intently, his gaze searching. After a moment of contemplation, he said, "Eleanor, I feel like you're different today. Like you've become a different person." Even the second male lead noticed the dramatic shift in Eleanor's personality. Yet, Julian, her husband of 3 years, remained oblivious. The contrast was stark and telling. My appreciation for Ethan deepened. "Perhaps," I said, a wry smile playing on my lips. "Maybe you could call it a rebirth of sorts. Facing a terminal diagnosis tends to clarify things, doesn't it? It makes you realize that some scumbag men just aren't worth dying for." I laughed, a light, almost detached sound, as if recounting someone else's story. "All right," Ethan said, his voice resolute. "I'll perform the surgery myself. Trust me, Eleanor." "I do," I said, my voice filled with genuine gratitude. "But before the surgery, there are still 2 things I need to do. Divorce Julian. And ensure that those 2 and received the retribution they deserved." Returning to the hotel suite, I found him waiting for me, just as I'd expected. He was seated on the sofa, his posture stiff, his expression somber. He looked like he'd been waiting for me for hours. "The divorce agreement," I said, dropping my purse on the table. "Is it finalized?" I sat opposite him, maintaining an equal footing, a stark contrast to the subservient wife I once was. Chapter 5, Are You in Such a Hurry? In the original narrative, whenever Julian was home, Eleanor would remain standing while he sat. When he was seated, she would hover nearby, waiting for his commands, ready to fetch tea or run errands. "Divorce," Julian repeated, his voice flat. "Are you in such a hurry, Eleanor?" His expression was troubled, a mixture of bewilderment and annoyance. He was clearly struggling with the radical shift in my attitude. "I'm just concerned that Isabelle's baby might be getting impatient," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "You wouldn't want your precious child to be born illegitimate, would you?" "Divorce was just the first step, Julian. Just you wait." Julian nodded slowly, his gaze distant. His eyes held a strange mixture of emotions: sadness? Regret? Guilt? It was difficult to decipher. "Very well," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "The revised agreement is here. Take a look." He methodically extracted a document from his briefcase, sliding it across the coffee table towards me. I reached for it eagerly, but before I could grasp it, his hand shot out, pinning the agreement firmly to the table. "What is it? Have you changed your mind?" I challenged, my voice laced with provocation. "Eleanor," Julian said, his voice softening slightly. "Tell me honestly. Are you ill? Is there something you're not telling me? Are you in financial distress? Are you being forced into this?" He looked at me, his eyes searching, almost pleading. He seemed desperate for me to say yes, to confirm his preconceived notions about me. "Honey, you're projecting," I said, my voice dripping with false sweetness. Ignoring his darkening complexion, I pushed his hand aside and began to carefully review the divorce agreement. The terms were crystal clear. Divorce. And I would receive half of his considerable assets. Without hesitation, I grabbed a pen and swiftly signed my name, Eleanor, beneath the wife's signature line. Now, transfer the funds, I said, pushing the signed document back across the table. Cash only. You can keep the real estate, the company shares, all of it. Once the money is in my account, I'll be out of your life, permanently. All right, he agreed, his voice strangely subdued. As he rose to leave, his silhouette against the doorway seemed unexpectedly forlorn. By the time I'd packed my luggage, a cheerful chime from my phone announced the arrival of a substantial sum into my bank account. Half of Fu Corporation's assets. A staggering fortune. Once I'd dealt with those two and recovered from surgery, I would take Ethan and Julian's money and embark on a life of glorious, unrestrained freedom. Outside the villa, a discreet black limousine waited. Ethan emerged from the driver's seat as I approached, gallantly taking my luggage and loading it into the trunk. Thank you, I said, offering him a grateful smile. Eleanor, with me, there's no need for thanks, Ethan replied, his smile warm and genuine. I cast one last glance at the opulent villa, the marital home of Eleanor and Julian. Leaving it behind did evoke a strange pang of regret, a lingering attachment to a life that could have been. From my purse, I retrieved 2 thick envelopes, dropping them into the mailbox outside the gates of the villa. A sudden sense of liberation washed over me. Let's go, Dr. Grant, I said, turning to Ethan, my voice light and carefree. You've helped me with my luggage. Let me treat you to dinner. Turning my head slightly, I admired Ethan's profile, sharp and defined, like a sculpture carved from marble. He was the epitome of a refined, gentle scholar. I had to admit, I was developing a bit of a crush on his looks. If the original Eleanor was blind to his charms, then I would gladly step in and pursue this wonderful man myself. Sounds perfect, Ethan said, his eyes sparkling with amusement. Ding. My phone buzzed with a news notification. Fu Corporation president and heiress Isabelle set to marry after pregnancy announcement, a match made in heaven. I let out a soft, derisive laugh. How desperate could that be? Barely had my divorce been finalized, and she'd already leaked news of their impending nuptials to the tabloids. Her eagerness was almost comical. I suddenly felt a surge of anticipation. I couldn't wait to see her face when she received my little surprise. The next morning, a furious pounding on my hotel room door jolted me awake. Irritated by the rude awakening, I yanked open the door, ready to unleash a torrent of complaints. Who is it? Do you have any idea how inconsiderate and rude it is to disturb someone's sleep like this? You deserve to be struck by lightning. Julian stood in the hallway, his face gaunt and haggard, his eyes filled with a mixture of anguish and disbelief. In his hand, he clutched a worn leather-bound diary. Eleanor, he whispered, his voice hoarse, trembling slightly. You're the girl who saved me all those years ago? Chapter 6, The Diary. I yawned, stretching languidly. Yesterday, before leaving the villa, I had mailed Eleanor's diary to Julian. Telling him the truth, letting him know he'd been in love with a carefully constructed illusion all these years, was that really so cruel? Surely, it wasn't more cruel than letting Eleanor silently endure all the pain, swallowing her tears in solitude. Yes, it was me, I replied casually, meeting his tormented gaze. Though, frankly, I deeply regret it now. Back then, I was foolish enough to offer you my blood, to save your life. I should have just let you bleed out. Or better yet, donated it to a dog. At least a dog would have offered me loyalty in return. You, on the other hand. Well, you know. All this time, Julian murmured, his voice thick with self-loathing, I thought Isabelle was that girl. She knew all the details, everything that happened when you saved me. I loved the wrong person. I shouldn't have treated you the way I did. His expression was a mask of agonizing regret. Because she secretly read my diary, I stated, matter-of-factly. I didn't bother to correct her before, but now that we're divorced, there's really no point in keeping up the pretense. You know the truth now. You can leave. I made a move to shut the door. Eleanor, please, Julian pleaded, his voice cracking, reaching out a hand to stop me. Give me another chance? It was all my fault. I was blind, so utterly blind. I mistook a mirage for reality, loved the wrong woman. Can we start over? He looked utterly broken, the picture of a man consumed by remorse. What do you take me for, Julian? I asked, my voice laced with ice. I am a human being, a person with emotions, with a heart. After everything you put me through, do you honestly believe I could still harbor any affection for you? That I could still love you? You are unbelievably narcissistic. This isn't some trivial mistake you can simply brush aside with a few empty words, Julian. The consequences are far-reaching. Just wait, Julian. You and Isabelle will both face the retribution you deserve. It's coming, and it's coming soon. I stared at him, my gaze devoid of any warmth, as if he were a stranger. Suddenly, Julian's face contorted in pain. He gasped, clutching at his chest, and then, shockingly, coughed up a mouthful of blood, staining the pristine white carpet of the hotel hallway. But what was this compared to the 3 pregnancies Eleanor had been forced to terminate at his command? What was a little blood compared to the emotional and physical trauma he had inflicted? To avoid having Julian collapse and potentially die on my doorstep, I reluctantly called for an ambulance. As the paramedics arrived, I leaned down, my voice a low whisper in his ear, laced with dark satisfaction. Remember to watch the news today, Julian. His eyes widened in alarm, a flicker of terror in their depths. He instinctively knew my ominous warning boded ill for him. Goodbye, Julian, I said, a chilling finality in my tone. Goodbye forever. I waved a dismissive farewell as they wheeled him away. Later that afternoon, I settled onto a plush chaise lounge, sipping fragrant herbal tea, and watched the news unfold on my phone screen. The headlines were a symphony of schadenfreude. Fu Corporation fiancé, a serial plagiarist. All acclaimed designs are stolen. Heiress returned from overseas? Actually, the daughter of a servant. Never even finished high school. Shotgun wedding? Paternity of the child a mystery. Fu Corporation fiancé spotted entering and leaving hotels with multiple men, intimate encounters. Photos attached. Plagiarism hound Isabelle, get out of the design industry. Fu Corporation president, complicity or condemnation of fiancé's fraudulent identity? Fu Corporation stock plummets. Reputation in tatters. I scrolled through the barrage of scandalous articles, a satisfied smile playing on my lips. The materials I'd anonymously mailed from the villa yesterday had certainly landed in the right hands. Those tabloid magazines were remarkably efficient. Having read the original novel, I knew Isabelle's celebrated designs were all stolen from Eleanor. Isabelle had even shamelessly begged Eleanor not to expose her plagiarism, relying on Eleanor's inherent kindness. The old Eleanor might have been compassionate, but I was not. And Isabelle's supposed heiress status? A complete fabrication. She was merely the daughter of Eleanor's family's housekeeper. That proximity had given her access to Eleanor's diary, allowing her to glean the intimate details of Eleanor saving Julian years ago, details she then used to impersonate Eleanor and ensnare Julian's affections. As for Isabelle's pregnancy, it was a desperate attempt to secure her position. She'd tried to drug Julian, hoping to orchestrate a compromising situation, but failed. Undeterred, she'd resorted to sleeping with multiple men until she finally conceived. Knock, knock, knock. A knock at the door interrupted my gleeful news consumption. I rose and opened the door to find Ethan standing there, a concerned expression on his face. Chapter 7, No need to say thank you. Thank you, Ethan, I said sincerely, for helping me. Without your assistance, I doubt those magazines would have dared to publicly expose Fu Corporation's dirty laundry. Anything for you, Eleanor, Ethan replied, his eyes locking with mine, radiating unwavering devotion. Anything at all. So, please, no need to say thank you. His voice was filled with an unspoken depth of feeling that resonated deeply within me. It was impossible not to be moved by his unwavering support. By the way, I asked, changing the subject slightly, did you happen to check on Julian at the hospital when you came over? How is he doing? My question was driven by curiosity, not concern. Ethan's lips curled into a wry smile. He saw the news, Ethan chuckled, a hint of dark humor in his tone. And promptly vomited blood again. Rage-induced. Hemorrhage, I believe is the medical term. A sick heart is the hardest to cure, Eleanor. I suspect he'll be a resident patient for quite some time. Ethan's expression was undeniably gleeful, a sentiment I wholeheartedly shared. Then, his gaze turned serious, his eyes meeting mine with intense sincerity. Eleanor, you shouldn't feel any guilt, any remorse, any sympathy for him. This is all Julian's fault. He deserves everything that's happening to him. You're right, I agreed, a newfound resolve hardening my voice. He absolutely deserves it. Leaving the hotel, Ethan headed to the parking garage to retrieve his car. I stood on the hotel steps, enjoying the fresh air, when a disheveled figure emerged from the shadows at the corner of the building. It took me a moment of stunned disbelief to recognize her. It was Isabelle. Her hair was a tangled mess, her clothes stained and ripped, and she was covered in what appeared to be rotten vegetable scraps and egg yolks. She looked like she'd been dragged through the mud, both literally and figuratively. Eleanor! Isabelle shrieked, her voice hoarse and filled with venom. You ruined me. I'm going to kill you. With a feral cry, Isabelle lunged at me, brandishing a glinting silver object in her hand, a kitchen knife. Instinct took over, and I leaped back, narrowly avoiding her attack. Isabelle, fueled by rage and desperation, couldn't stop her momentum. She stumbled forward, her head colliding with the heavy glass door behind me. The sickening thud of impact was followed by a sharp cry of pain as blood gushed from a deep gash on her forehead, streaming down her face in a gruesome torrent. She looked terrifying, and yet, strangely pathetic. Isabelle, I said, my voice cold and unwavering, cutting through her hysteria. This is your karma. This is the consequence of your own actions. Everything I revealed about you is the truth, Isabelle, nothing but the unvarnished truth. Did you honestly believe that the facade you presented to the world could last forever? That a lie, repeated often enough, would somehow transform into reality? A counterfeit, Isabelle, will always be exposed, sooner or later. Clang. The knife slipped from Isabelle's trembling fingers, clattering onto the pavement. Her legs buckled, and she collapsed at my feet, sinking to her knees, her body racked with sobs, tears mingling with blood on her face. Eleanor, I'm sorry, she choked out, her voice a broken whisper. Everything was a mistake, a moment of madness, a lapse in judgment. Those design competition trophies, you can have them back. My fake identity. You can reclaim it. I only beg you, please, don't let Julian leave me. I went to the hospital to see him, but he refused to even see me. Please, Eleanor, please help me. Intercede for me with Julian, please. He's all I have left in the world. He's the only thing I can't lose. Her eyes were bloodshot, desperate, pleading. She pounded her forehead against the ground with each word, a grotesque display of self-abasement. I remained silent, watching her performance with detached indifference, devoid of pity or compassion. Her desperate act had attracted a small crowd of onlookers. I could feel their judging eyes on me, hear their muttered whispers. Some murmured about my cruelty, my cold-heartedness. But their opinions were meaningless to me. After an agonizing silence, seeing that her performance was having no effect, Isabelle lifted her bloodied face, her eyes blazing with renewed fury. Eleanor! How can you be so heartless? You are truly a monster. Switching tactics now, are we? I said, my voice dripping with disdain. The woe is me act didn't work, so now we're back to the venom? The true colors are showing again. Aren't they? I scoffed. Spare me the theatrics, Isabelle. Save your tears for Julian. Don't waste your pathetic performance on me. It disgusts me. And I'm not buying it. I turned to walk away, dismissing her with a wave of my hand. Eleanor. You're forcing me to do this. Seeing that I wasn't going to help her, Isabelle's eyes narrowed, hardening with a chilling resolve. She snatched up the fallen knife, her gaze fixed on me with a terrifying intensity. She lunged again, this time with a renewed, desperate energy. For a split second, I thought she was going to try and attack me again, but then, to my astonishment, she twisted the knife, and with a guttural cry, plunged it into her own abdomen. Chapter 8, This woman is really ruthless. Help. Murder. Someone's trying to kill me. Isabelle shrieked, clutching at her bleeding stomach, desperately grabbing at my arm, her voice rising in a crescendo of manufactured hysteria. I couldn't help but let out a short, mirthless laugh. This woman was truly ruthless. Completely unhinged. Stabbing herself? Really? You. Woman. I warn you to stay away from Eleanor, or you'll regret it. Suddenly, a tall figure moved with lightning speed. Ethan, without hesitation, delivered a powerful kick, sending Isabelle sprawling away from me. He stepped forward, placing himself protectively between Isabelle and me. It was Ethan. In the past, in situations like this, it would always be Julian who appeared, but his protection was always for Isabelle, never for Eleanor. But now, everything was different. I was the one being shielded, the one being defended, simply because the man standing in front of me was Ethan. A warmth bloomed in my chest, a fluttering sensation in my stomach, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Ethan, I'm all right, I reassured him, gently patting his arm. Just call the police. Then, with a sense of grim satisfaction, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, inconspicuous pinhole camera. Having read the original novel, I had anticipated that Isabelle, in her desperation, would likely resort to some kind of desperate, attention-grabbing stunt. I'd secretly equipped myself with a hidden camera, just in case, intending to capture her inevitable meltdown. Seeing the camera in my hand, Isabelle's carefully constructed facade crumbled completely. She collapsed on the ground, her eyes devoid of hope, her face a mask of utter defeat. When the police arrived, I calmly played back the footage from the camera, clearly showing Isabelle's initial attack, her self-inflicted wound, and her desperate attempts to frame me for attempted murder. The evidence was irrefutable. Isabelle was handcuffed and led away to a police car, charged with assault and intentional fabrication of evidence. Rumor had it she was facing a sentence of anywhere from 3 to 10 years. If there was a dictionary definition for self-destruction, Isabelle's picture would be right next to it. Eleanor, I thought, a sense of finality washing over me, I've avenged you. Later that day, I found myself in a sterile hospital operating room, clad in a thin hospital gown, lying on a cold metal table. Gazing up at the harsh glare of the surgical lights, a shiver of fear ran down my spine. Only a 25% chance of survival. Complete recovery or death on this very table. The stakes were terrifyingly high. I valued my life. Even in this transmigrated body, I was afraid to die. Ethan, in his crisp white coat, finished checking the surgical equipment. He seemed to sense my fear, his gaze softening with understanding and reassurance. Eleanor, don't be afraid, he said, his voice gentle yet firm. I will protect you. You'll be all right. Trust me. I did trust Ethan's medical skills. His words, his calm demeanor, eased my anxiety, if only slightly. Ethan, I said, my voice a little shaky. When I recover, if I recover, promise me a gift. Anything you desire, he replied, his tone a mixture of playful affection and earnest promise. Even the stars in the sky, I'll reach up and pluck them down for you. If I wasn't about to undergo a life-or-death surgery, I might have laughed. Then, let me ask you something first, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You said I've changed a lot recently. Which Eleanor do you prefer? The old Eleanor, or the Eleanor I am now? He paused, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He clearly hadn't expected such a personal question at this critical moment. Don't answer just yet, I continued, a mischievous glint in my eye. Give me your answer after the surgery, when I wake up. Lean closer, I murmured, beckoning him nearer. I'll whisper in your ear and tell you exactly what gift I want. All right, he said, leaning in, his ear close to my lips. As I whispered my request, I saw a noticeable shift in his expression, a spark of surprise, then understanding, then something deeper, something hopeful. Let's begin the surgery, I said, my voice gaining strength. Everything else can wait until after. Agreed? Agreed, he said, his voice thick with emotion. The red light above the operating room door flashed on, sealing us off from the outside world. When I opened my eyes again, it was 3 days later. I tried to flex my fingers, but found my hand gently encased in another, larger, warmer hand. Turning my head slowly, I saw a dark head resting on the edge of my bed. Ethan was asleep, his hand clasped tightly around mine. Chapter 9, Epilogue. Ethan. My voice was raspy, my throat feeling like it had been scorched by fire. Ethan stirred, his head lifting. He blinked sleepily, then his eyes widened, filled with relief and joy as he focused on me. Eleanor. You're awake. I managed, a weak affirmative sound. From that moment on, he was my devoted nurse, fussing over me, coaxing me to drink water, spoon-feeding me bland but nourishing rice porridge, his care unwavering and tender. Once I was stronger, more fully recovered, he hesitated for a moment, as if carefully choosing his words. While you were unconscious, he began, his voice low, Julian came to see you. He said he was consumed by regret, that he wanted to win you back, to pursue you again. But I turned him away. I looked at him, a surge of warmth flooding my heart. You did the right thing, Ethan, I said firmly. Good riddance. There's no going back to a toxic past, especially with a like him. He's no longer worthy. Let him wallow in his misery. A smile touched the corners of Ethan's lips, a hint of satisfaction in his eyes. I saw the news yesterday, he said, changing the subject. Phoo. Corporation is in chaos. Shareholders are demanding withdrawals, stock prices are plummeting due to the scandal. Julian must be in a complete meltdown. Serves him right. I added, a touch of vindictiveness in my tone. As if reassured that I held no lingering affection for Julian, Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box, a deep sapphire blue. Eleanor, he said, his voice suddenly formal, a hint of nervousness in his tone. The gift you asked for. I have it right here. Will you accept it? He opened the box, revealing a dazzling 10-carat diamond ring, sparkling with breathtaking brilliance. In my mind, fireworks exploded, showering me with light and color. Pop, 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 pop. Was this what heart-fluttering joy felt like? My heart threatened to leap right out of my chest. And, your answer? I asked, my voice trembling slightly, trying to maintain a semblance of composure. Eleanor, Ethan said, his voice husky with emotion, his eyes fixed on mine with unwavering intensity. No matter how you change, no matter what you become, as long as you are Eleanor, you are the woman I love. And I know, with absolute certainty, that I want to spend the rest of my life with you. He gently lifted the ring from its velvet bed and slid it onto my left ring finger, where it sparkled like a miniature star. After my discharge from the hospital, I stayed at the hotel for a while longer, waiting until after the wedding to move in with Ethan. Knock, knock, knock. A knock on the hotel room door startled me. I exchanged a questioning glance with Ethan. He rose and accompanied me to the door. Standing in the hallway was Julian. I almost didn't recognize him. He looked even more haggard than before, utterly drained. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, as if he hadn't slept properly in weeks. A stubble of beard covered his jaw, making him look prematurely aged, 10 years older than his actual age. His once impeccably tailored white shirt was half tucked into his trousers, the other half hanging out, carelessly rumpled. Gone was the polished, self-assured business tycoon, replaced by a shadow of his former self. Seeing Ethan and me standing together, side by side, a picture of domestic contentment, Julian visibly recoiled, as if struck by a physical blow. He stood frozen, stunned into silence. "Julian," I said, breaking the awkward silence, my voice cool and detached. "What brings you here?" You two are together?" Julian finally managed to stammer, a painful twist, contorting his lips into a mockery of a smile. When I didn't immediately respond, his shoulders slumped, his expression shifting to one of utter defeat. "Of course," he murmured, his voice bitter. "I'm just your ex-husband. I have no right to ask." "Eleanor, I lost you, didn't I?" "Mr. Julian," I said, my tone crisp and businesslike, "I doubt you came all the way here just to engage in sentimental reminiscing. Given our history, I hardly think we're suited for friendly chats and nostalgic walks down memory lane." I crossed my arms, signaling my complete lack of interest in prolonging this encounter. "Eleanor," Julian said, his voice barely a whisper, a flicker of desperation in his eyes. Could you possibly lend me some money?" Humiliation flickered across his face. "Because of the scandal," he explained, his voice strained, "shareholders are panicking, demanding to withdraw their investments. My cash flow is completely tied up. I gave you almost all my liquid assets in the divorce settlement. My real estate, my holdings. They're not easily converted to cash right now. I have nowhere else to turn. I need to borrow some funds, just temporarily." Julian, the once powerful and influential CEO, was now reduced to begging his ex-wife for a loan. The irony was almost unbearable. Perhaps it was a lingering trace of the original Eleanor's soft heart, or maybe just a flicker of human compassion, but I felt a pang of something akin to pity. I pulled out my phone and initiated a bank transfer, sending him a substantial sum. "Consider this not a loan, Julian," I said, my voice deliberately laced with a cutting edge. "Consider it compensation for my wasted youth, and for my companionship over the years." For a man like Julian, accustomed to power and dominance, offering companionship compensation was an insult far more devastating than any outright rejection. Behind me, I heard Ethan chuckle softly, a low rumble of amusement. "Thank you," Julian murmured, accepting the transfer notification with a defeated nod. Without another word, he turned and walked away, his shoulders slumped, his gait heavy. I watched his retreating figure, growing smaller and smaller in the distance. Poor Julian, I thought, a touch of wry amusement in my heart. Encountering a transmigrated version of his wife had certainly been his misfortune. He had become the most tragic male lead in this entire melodramatic saga. But ultimately, it was his own actions that had led to his downfall. He had single-handedly transformed himself from the male protagonist of his own life into a supporting character in mine. Perhaps this was punishment enough. Perhaps, for now, this chapter of my life could finally be closed. A month later, Ethan and I officially became husband and wife, exchanging vows and rings in a lavish, fairy-tale wedding ceremony that was the talk of the city. I sent Julian a wedding invitation, a final, almost mocking gesture. But he didn't attend. 3 years later, Ethan and I were blessed with twins, a boy and a girl. With our children in tow, Ethan and I embarked on a global adventure, traveling the world, exploring new cultures, and creating a lifetime of happy memories. In the original short novel, the ending saw Eleanor, in a moment of inexplicable weakness, reconcile with Julian after his long and arduous pursuit of forgiveness. But my arrival had rewritten the script. My story, my life, had diverged from the original narrative, leading me to a far happier ending, a future filled with love and joy with Ethan. And in my heart, I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that this new ending, the one I had written for myself, was infinitely better. Belated affection is cheaper than weeds.